headlights driving into the darkness northbound on I-75, January 17th, 2021. Welcome back to the Sunshine State Rails. And this night we're on our way to Central Florida with one mission and one mission only: to chase a southbound CSX test train from Lake Panasoffkee to wherever it would end up going. This all began almost a week ago when we heard reports of a K-870-12 leaving Chicago. This would end up being one solid unit train of potash bound for Tampa. This was a test train, so we all had different theories on what the test was when they were leaving Chicago, but by the time they got down here, we had a few reasonable guesses. I probably don't need to explain too much on the power for this train, considering pretty much everybody in the state knew about it, but I'll go for it anyway. Between now and when K-870 would reach us, there were quite a few other CSX trains that we caught in the areas. However, those will be set for a separate video. This video is dedicated completely to K-870. A number of hours later, we would arrive at the Spirit Truck Shop in Lake Panasoffkee. Here we would spend our final few hours awaiting K-870 to arrive from the north. After a few more trains and a few more hours, it was 12:48 a.m. and the gates would come down to signify the arrival of K-870-14, with what may become the lash-up of the year, not just for me. Gliding through Panasoffkee is the K-870-14, a unit train of potash bound for Rockport docks in Tampa. This is going to sound very odd to a lot of people, especially those who are familiar with what Rockport is. It's just south of Tampa on the Tampa Terminal subdivision, and since I commonly frequent the Palmetto subdivision, which becomes the Tampa Terminal subdivision in East Tampa, y'all have likely seen the Rockport location on my channel a number of times as well. As we follow 870 through the woods of Lake Panasoffkee and down to Bushnell, we can clear a few things up here. What I just mentioned there, that is the test. Rockport Yard was idled for about a month, as in it was not being used, for what we believe to be the installation of equipment to handle potash loads. It looks like potash is now to be a fairly regular commodity shipped into Rockport, which will likely be transloaded to ships and shipped off to an overseas customer who is likely ordering this stuff. So it goes without saying that this is the first ever potash train to run to the Tampa area. And for their first shipment, they're getting a big hunk of this stuff. Out of Chicago, this train was 8,500 feet long with 175 cars of loaded potash. But somewhere along the way, the decision was made to drop 28 of the loaded cars and bring them down by other means. Ironically, Q441, the Waycross to Tampa mixed freight, which we will see in the other video, from this night of course, had those extra potash loads in his consist. Potash itself is mined in Canada. It's a pretty big component in certain fertilizers, but can be used as a fertilizer on its own. And because of that, Florida would get unit potash trains from time to time, however they wouldn't go to Tampa. They would run to Winston and then take another route to Sebring for interchange to the USSC or US Sugar Railroad. There, they would take it down to Clewiston and use the potash to nourish their cane fields, which makes sense as to why they would need a unit train amount considering how many acres of fields they own down there. The biggest deposits in Canada for this stuff are Saskatchewan and New Brunswick. Saskatchewan has the world's largest reserve for potash, roughly 1.2 billion tons in reserve. And in just about 4 miles and a bit of speed picked up, we make it through downtown Bushnell. say that after all this time, this train has made it down here. Though behind the scenes to most viewers, this train's journey down here was not an easy one. Leaving Chicago with 175 loaded cars tipped the scales for over 27,000 tons. And other than the fact that this train sat in a Georgia siding for 43 hours and lost many more to PTC and meeting other trains, they stalled on a hill for almost 3.5 hours in Lineville, Alabama. That was probably somewhere around where the decision was made to take off those 28 cars. This train was so heavy that it warranted 2 mid-train DPU engines. Both were also Canadian Pacific. Alright, I'm not going to sit here and ignore what's right in front of us. CEFX 1002. That was the main attraction for most rail fans throughout the US on this train. A leased AC 4400 CW sporting the Central Maine and Quebec Railway scheme. This is pretty insane as well, because after doing some research afterward, I realized that there were only 2 AC 4400s in existence that wear this paint scheme. Especially since the railroad itself, though it was bought out by CP some time back, was interesting in that it operates in both a Canadian province and a US state. Either way, a beautiful mix of blue and gray paint and some nice old wear and tear as they lug over 20,000 tons of potash down through Florida. We gained some distance on him and swung in at the north end of Lakuchi siding for our next ground level shot. We leapfrogged them back down to Dade City, where we had been earlier in the night, and where a number of buddies of mine were also here waiting, and that 20,000-ton train was not far behind. From there, it was pedal to the metal, and we made it down to Richland, where we got 870 before making our loops through Chancey Road. Here we would stay for more of the train, since we were going to get blocked anyway. In the train, and here comes our double DPUs. Do I even need to explain this spot? Plant City, unit potash train, first time in history, blah blah blah, here it is. can say is, wow, what an awesome chase. But oh no, it's not over. We had more to do. Though we did have to part ways with my friends here, so we gave everybody our congrats and parted ways, to which we would make our run over to Tampa to get K870 pulling into or around Yeoman. We weren't sure how they were going to do it since the train was profiled to go down to Rockport, but we pulled up at 78th Street to see what would happen. And over scanner chatter before we got there, K870 was to pull onto the Yeoman bypass and stop there, and at 3:02 a.m., K870-14 pulls past 78th Street.
That's correct. You okay to pull down the bypass and stop wherever they need you to stop? Between Mango and AY, that's the only other one, over. Thank you, dispatcher.
As the train rolls down the bypass to come to a stop, you can see more clearly the labeling on the majority of these cars, Canpotex. After chasing this train for almost 60 miles, you start to think about things a little more than you would otherwise, and I came to the conclusion that that likely stood for Canadian Potash Exports, Canpotex. As K870 rolls down the bypass track, it's crazy to think that this is the first ever potash train to reach Tampa, Florida. Crossing the bypass canal and coming into the floodlighting of the yard, these potash cars have had a fairly rough journey, but they've made it down. The Yeoman bypass is commonly used by Bone Valley trains coming from or going to Rockport or East Tampa to bypass Yeoman Yard. Since this train was taking that track, it led me to believe that they may have a crew on standby to take the train to Rockport.
Hey, Yeoman, come in, Jeff.
Yeoman, over.
Hey, we tying it down right here.
I'm sending you a recrew, you don't need to tie it down.
And that right there was our golden ticket. There sure was a crew on standby to take the train down, and that led us to a shot that, well, I never thought I'd see in my life. Here we are, right around the corner, at Control Point TS. The train was to head down to Rockport, but they had to get one train out of the way. Even though it was 3:30 a.m., there are still trains working out here. CSX train 0824, an East Tampa area switcher, was coming back north after finishing his duties and picking up empties. Once he got out of the way, K870, having now swapped IDs to Y350 and with a fresh crew, would lug the train to Rockport. For those of you who aren't familiar with TS, it's the southern entrance to Yeoman Yard, the beginning of the Tampa Terminal subdivision, down to Rockport, East Tampa, Port Manatee, and eventually Bradenton, and the Palmetto subdivision, which starts at East Tampa and runs to Bradenton. As in, this is the spot where the Tropicana Local, 0750, and all other Palmetto subdivision trains begin their journeys. This is the gateway to the subdivision unique to me, and I never thought in my life that there would be, let alone that I would be able to capture, a unit potash train with a CMQ painted locomotive passing this spot. But on January 18th, 2021, at 4:13 a.m., here we are.
9364, clear TS, on the way, northbound.
Finally, the stem of the Y, the entrance to Rockport Yard. After some excruciating days on the rails, K-870, Rockport's first shipment of potash, would arrive in one piece. It's crazy to say, but at 4:35 a.m., our chase would finally come to a close, as Rockport's first shipment of potash comes into the yard to get sorted through and dealt with later. Along with the temperatures being magnificent tonight, it was an amazing, fun-filled, nerve-wracking chase down the S-Line and Tampa terminal subs. As a side note, potash shipments to Rockport will likely become a regular thing, as, like I said, someone, somewhere, is ordering a lot of potash. Also, huge thanks to a bunch of people, especially Max Stevens, for keeping me updated on where this train was at and what it was doing throughout the shenanigans of its journey down. Otherwise, that would conclude our night, and I thank you for watching. I hope it was somewhat enjoyable, and until next time, this is Kotabeaner, and I will see you out there somewhere on the Sunshine State Rails.